Now that we have seen all the elements needed to prepare our script, we're ready to run our test scenario. But first, let's have a quick look at all the elements that we have included in our script. Let's take the script we were using in the previous session when we were learning how to set up our test scenario. To prepare this script, we have first recorded these 4 user actions. We have checked that each of the requests includes its header manager. We have then added assertions for all of our requests. In some of them, we have added text response assertions. In some other, we've validated the response code. The important thing is to make sure that each of our requests have their corresponding assertion. We have then introduced this element called the cookie manager, which allows us to store the cookies that are sent in server responses and use it in following requests. We have seen that this allows us to save the cookies per thread. Another element we have included is the HTTP request defaults, which allows us to specify the server only once and avoids us from having to specify it in each of the following requests. Another thing we have done is to parameterize the search element. We're using a search variable for which we're reading the data from a CSV file. We have also learned how to extract information from the server responses using regular expressions. In this case, we're extracting the product ID from the first element in the search to then use it in the product selection, and also when we add the element to the cart. After all this, we have set the thread properties, defining our test scenario. So in this particular case, we're going to be running 5 concurrent users with a ramp up of 5 seconds, and we're going to be running 3 iterations for each of them. Before we run the test, let's add this other listener called the aggregate report. This will provide information on the response times for each request. So let's run the test. All the threads are starting and they're going to start iterating, taking the parameters from our CSV file. We can see that all the results have been successful. If you go to the aggregate report, this first column shows us the amount of samples of each request that were sent. For this first one, for example, that is the corresponding one for loading the page, it is correct to only see 5, 1 for each of our 5 virtual users, since we put it inside a once-only controller and it will be run only once per thread. We can see the average response time, the median, the 90th percentile. All these other requests were run 15 times, corresponding to the 15 searches and selections. Lastly, I want to show you something that we sometimes do for debugging purposes. We use the parameters in the name of the request, so we can then see them in execution time. In this case, for example, it allows us to easily identify which element is being searched in each of these requests. So this was it for our JMeter part of the training. We have learned how to automate a script, how to add complexity to it, add validations, how to define a test scenario, and how to run our tests. In our following lessons, we'll be focusing on running our tests from BlazeMeter.